This is a follow-up to our previous video about Donald Trump's disastrous and seemingly highly edited Fox News interview with Maria Bartiromo. In that interview, Trump claimed definitively that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium has been neutralized and was not relocated prior to the strikes. Well, he was publicly contradicted by MAGA Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who admitted, we don't know that for sure, humiliating Trump on live TV. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, before we get to Lindsey Graham, just to remind you, this is what Donald Trump said most recently in his Fox News interview.
Do you think that the Iran regime hid some of the enriched uranium before the strikes?
No. You mean, did they take it out of the deep one? No.
Because you were pretty clear you can't have a weapon. You're going to have to come to the talk. Something's going to happen.
I don't think they did. No, I think, first of all, it's very hard to do. It's very dangerous to do. It's very heavy, very, very heavy. It's a very hard thing to do. Plus, we didn't give them much notice because they didn't know we were coming until just, then. And
They did know. They did know. As a matter of fact, it's been reported Trump has admitted that Iran knew in advance that the U.S. was going to militarily strike them, and it gave them time to at least attempt to mitigate the damage. Now, whether or not they've succeeded remains to be seen, but Trump is definitively claiming, no, it was a total success. Not only did we eliminate the hardware, the stockpile of enriched uranium has been neutralized. It's buried beneath a mountain of rubble. No way has it been relocated. But that's not what MAGA Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who was also briefed by the CIA director, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense on this military operation, that is not what Lindsey Graham is saying on live TV. Graham is saying, we don't know for sure.
But what about the uranium? Where is that?
So the 900 pounds?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's at the bottom of Fordo or some other site, but it's still out there. But here's the big point for me.
And does that concern you? Is that
definitely. Operation Midnight Hammer was a tremendous military success. It set the program back, I think, a couple of years. But the question for the world, does the regime still desire to make a nuclear weapon? The answer is yes. Do they still desire to destroy Israel and come after us? The answer is yes. Until that changes, we've got to keep we're in trouble.
We've got to keep we're in trouble. So, okay. So again, let's be clear. Trump says definitively, nope, it was neutralized. It's buried beneath a mountain of rubble. Lindsey Graham, who was also briefed on that intelligence and is much, much, much smarter than Trump, says, we don't know for sure. It's still out there. Maybe it's at the bottom of the Fordo site. Maybe it is buried beneath a mountain of rubble. Maybe it has been relocated. We don't know for sure, but it concerns him. So he contradicts Trump on live TV, period. He's saying that Trump is being too certain with his declarations. Now, at the same time, he is a MAGA Republican senator, so he's also trying to, give Trump a verbal massage. Like, this is, it's an amazing military strike. It accomplished its goals. It set back Iran's nuclear program for years, and perhaps it did. And listen, the fact that the enriched uranium is out there doesn't mean that necessarily that the military strikes were a total failure, especially if Trump were to phrase it more honestly. He could say something like, listen, we don't know for sure what happened to the uranium that was already enriched. We're trying to ascertain that. It's possible, and hopefully it's buried beneath, the devastated facility at Fordo. But it's possible that they've relocated it, and we're trying to ascertain that, and, then we will reassess our options. And then he could go into, the 36-hour flight and how it was done under secrecy and how it hit its targets and the increasing intelligence consensus that at the bare minimum, the nuclear program was severely damaged. He could do those things and try to spin it as a win, and it would be pretty easy to do so. But again, the problem with Trump is that he always, shoots over his skis, right? He gets over his skis. He always engages in superlative and hyperbole, total success, unprecedented, the greatest ever. Everything is always off the charts. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 30. And this is what gets him in trouble. And this is what leads to awkward situations like this, where a MAGA Republican senator who has no real principle, Lindsey Graham has abandoned virtually every principle he's claimed to have on the altar of Trump, is publicly contradicting him. Now, of course, you might think, well, maybe Graham is lying. And it's possible because at the same time, Lindsey Graham is a hawk. Lindsey Graham is rock hard at the notion of some sort of like boots on the ground situation, like, troop to troop combat in Iran. There's no question that he is much more consistently hawkish and one of the more consistently hawkish members of the Republican Party. So you could say, well, he is lying. He's the enriched uranium has been dealt with, but he wants to leave it open so as to try to nudge Trump in a more hawkish posture. That's possible. He has a motive to do so. But Donald Trump is an even bigger liar than Lindsey Graham. He's a pathological liar par excellence. He is an unparalleled, unprecedented, inveterate liar that the likes of which we've simply not seen in modern American politics, I suppose, with the possible exception of somebody like former MAGA Republican Congressman George Santos. So they both have their motives to lie, Trump and Graham. Graham because he's a hawk, Trump because it's all about, superlative and, everything he does is the greatest ever. But again, there's an increasing number of elected lawmakers who have questions not just about the efficacy of the strikes, but more importantly about the uranium. So here's Democratic Senator Mark Warner also conducting an interview earlier today, and he discusses this.
First of all, our military did an extraordinary job to launch these strikes, not even have the Iranians fire back. And clearly, nobody wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. The problem here is that the president, before any data came back in on the night of the strikes, says totally obliterated.
Right.
Well, you have no information.
Right.
So if that's the standard, I think it put our military, his cabinet, in a really untenable position. Because what you can have is you could have the program itself set back a ways.
Sure.
Which appears the destruction. And I wish it would be totally obliterated. I wish the president was right. But when you went after the facilities, but we didn't even go after the enriched uranium at Esfahani, and the fact that they have some additional capabilities elsewhere around, the idea that Iran could potentially rush to a single bomb or two that could be delivered, maybe not on a missile, but in the backseat or trunk of a car, we have to be aware of that. My concern when the president says totally obliterated is, does he lull the American people, and the world for that matter, into a sense of, well, that problem's taken care of?
Yes, he does. And he sets an unreasonable expectation that he will almost certainly fail to live up to, as he almost always does. And this is the problem. And then when he almost always fails to live up to the expectation that he himself set unprompted, then he bitches about it. And he's like, no, you can't hold my words against me. You can't hold me to the standard I created for myself. This is one of the many paradoxes of Trump support in dealing with Donald Trump, right? So again, it sure seems like the enriched uranium is out there, according to both Democratic and Republican lawmakers, including Republican lawmakers loyal to Trump. This does undermine Trump's positive claims. This is humiliating him on live TV. But I also want to return to Lindsey Graham in one other context, because then the topic turned to recent Supreme Court rulings and whether or not the notion of universal injunctions, where a district court can effectively block a government policy on a national level. So one judge in one district in one state can basically block for an indeterminate amount of time an entire nationwide policy, which Republicans saw quite often under the Biden administration. We talked about a recent Supreme Court ruling which effectively defanged nationwide injunctions. Right now, at the very least right now, to Donald Trump and the Republican Party's benefit. Lindsey Graham is happy about this, but he does address the hypocrisy. That's one thing about Lindsey Graham, which is interesting, is for a man who constantly defies his own principles, he is on occasion honest enough to be like, yeah, we love nationwide injunctions when it's, when Democrats are in power and we're out of power. We like to use nationwide injunctions against them, and they like to do it against us. And we should also look at forum shopping, which is people taking lawsuits to districts and areas that they believe are more favorable to them politically, right? So I want to play this clip because it is interesting.
You were going judge shopping back in the day.
Everybody goes judge shopping.
I'm old enough to remember when you were all in favor of the injunction against DAPA. Under
Totally.
Obama.
I mean, and I'm here to say judge shopping needs to stop. We need to have a system where if you're going to enjoin policy for the nation, it's done at a higher level than a single judge for the left or the right.
So Republicans will be complaining about this at some
eventually.
point.
So he laughs because he admits it. He's like, listen, when Biden's in power, when Obama's in power, when a Democrat's in power, we want to impose nationwide injunctions. And we did successfully quite often. But when Trump is in power, Republicans in power, we don't want the ability to have nationwide injunctions or to have them levied against us. Now, the other reason I'm pointing this out, again, is just because the total kind of stunning candor of it, right? Yeah, we're hypocrites, is I will remind people that during the Biden administration, when it came to nationwide injunctions, the Biden administration did repeatedly ask the Supreme Court to address nationwide injunctions. Like, hey, we're getting hit with nationwide injunctions. Do you want to step in and see if this is improper? And on at least two occasions, at least two, under President Biden, the Supreme Court said, no, we really don't. As a matter of fact, I'll pull up, I was just in a brief debate on Twitter earlier today about this very, very topic. Let me pull the source up over here, drag it over, and take a look at it. Okay, some sources. In Department of Education versus Career College and Schools of Texas, President Biden's Solicitor General asked the court to consider, I misspelled two. Oh, geez. That's humiliating. They to consider two questions. They only granted the first, declining to address universal injunctions. So President Biden's government, back in 2023, they asked the Supreme Court during an appeal two questions, and the second one was whether the Court of Appeals erred in ordering the district court to enter preliminary relief on a universal basis. And then second time, in Garland v. Texas Cop Shop, and this was a later case, because the lower courts need guidance on the propriety of universal injunctions, this court may additionally wish to treat the application as a petition for a writ of certiorari before judgment, presenting the question whether the district court erred in entering preliminary relief on a universal basis. And again, twice under Biden, the Supreme Court didn't want to pick it up. They're like, oh, no, we'll permit universal injunctions against Biden. We don't want to really address that. And as a matter of fact, Trump-appointed conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch, who is relatively consistent, even though I'd loathe so much of his views, during the concurring opinion addressing that second case, he even said, he goes, listen, I agree with the majority. He goes, but the only thing I'd do differently compared to my conservative colleagues is I would have addressed the government's question about the question regarding universal injunctions. So even Gorsuch is like, man, it sure seems like we're tabling this, and it's a good question to ask. And of course, they pick it right back up when universal injunctions are being imposed against the Trump administration. So the bottom line is this, just again as a sidebar, since we're addressing Lindsey Graham, this Supreme Court is wildly unprincipled and wildly inconsistent. And in the aggregate, it really is not always, but in the aggregate, the conservative supermajority is a dependable judicial ally to the Trump administration, and they will violate consistency and their own principles to do it. There you have it. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.